Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Book Leads Impactful Books for Life and Leadership. I'm your series host and leadership performance coach, John Jaramillo. This podcast series is about getting to the books that have impacted the lives of my colleagues, friends, my network. So these are all great leads to those books that have influenced them, impacted them, whether it's in their business, their work as an entrepreneur, or working for somebody else, in coaching, whatever it may be, work as well as life. To me, it all crosses over from one environment to the next. You take those lessons and use them in whatever world you're operating, whether it is that business side or your personal side. So for this particular podcast, I go through three categories of books. The first category is books that they're schooling me on that I've never read. The second category is one that we've both read and we're comparing notes, whether it's one specifically covered for the series or one we've read before the series in our past lives. And then the third category is when I bring out authors and or publishers to talk about the messages in the books that they want to discuss. For this particular episode, I have an author in the chair, and the great author that's going to share his ideas with me is Cory Carlson. And as an entrepreneur, former executive, husband, and father of three, Cory Carlson understands the pressures of working that the working parents face. He's passionate about helping business leaders win at home and at work. 20 years in corporate America gave Cory amazing opportunities as he worked his way up to the executive level, but he also saw brokenness. So he saw work without purpose, burnout, lack of focus, strained marriages, and absentee parents, and business leaders especially were often not living life to the fullest. When Cory discovered coaching, it helped him become a better leader, husband, father. So he left his corporate career to help other leaders win at work and at home. And Cory does this through executive coaching, speaking, and writing. He has a civil engineer degree from the University of Missouri and an MBA from Rockhurst University. His first book, released in 2019, is titled Win at Home First, and it's an inspirational guide for work-life balance. His book was #1 on Amazon new release in 3 categories and listed in Forbes as under the 7 books everyone on your team should read. Cory just released his second book, Rise and Go. This book is for leaders who get knocked down and want to get back up quicker. He hosts the leadership podcast, Win at Home First, a top 1.5% global podcast on per listen notes. And he currently lives in Cincinnati with his awesome wife and 3 amazing children. And we're talking about each of our 3 kids. Mine are on the younger side. His are 2, one going to college, one entering high school, and then one about 10 years old. So it's always great to compare notes with parents that are further along, just so I don't get myself into too much of a mess, Cory. But in any case, I was lucky enough where Cory had heard about the series, reached out about bringing his book on and its message. We touched base on social media, connected, and there's a lot of mention, as I mentioned in the biography, there's a lot of mention of work-life balance, of family, and just seeing what Cory shares on social media, even LinkedIn. A lot of it is about family. Cory, a lot of the posts that you've shared are about family, which is an amazing thing. And it's not just, here's my human side. It is, here's my human side. Here's my personality. Here are the people that make me, and here's a lesson. So there's a lot of crossing over from the personal side to what that can bring to make us all better. So I appreciate those posts. So not having to say it, but I looked through his stuff, I looked through his work, and I wanted to bring him on for that conversation. So Cory, thank you so much for joining me.
Oh, well, John, thank you very much. Thanks for what you're doing and giving me an opportunity to share my books with your audience. And yeah, just humbled because I know you have a lot of different people, and for me to get a part of airtime, I'm very grateful for. So thank you.
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of coaches that I interview, coaches with books, but all of us have such a different take based on our own experiences, our own, even the tone of our voice, the tone of our experiences, what we've learned in our past. So I'm grateful that all of you, the ones that I've interviewed, have taken that time. So thank you so much. Before we jump deeper into the conversation, though, so who are you today? So I gave the brief biography, but what does your work look like today?
Yeah, today I am. I'm a husband. I'm a father. I've been a husband for 23 years, and so my wife has been along for the journey, both the ups and the downs. And I'm sure we'll talk about some of those throughout our conversation. And then I am a father of 3 kids. As you mentioned, we just dropped off our oldest at college last week, which is just an unbelievable kind of experience. And then our middle start high school, and then our 10-year-old. So, that's kind of, I have to be reminded that that is, one of the most important things to me. And the first book, Went Home First, was this idea of work-life balance. And I had to do a keynote a couple months ago, John. I put together this little stat, thinking it through, and I was like, oh my goodness, I've had 18 bosses in my career, but I've had one family.
Yeah.
But so often I've made decisions for bosses that I'm not even talking to anymore. I don't even know where they're at. But yet I made choices and decisions to sacrifice family time for these bosses. And so, I mean, it's a tension to be managed. I mean, you can't just walk away from it. And we have to please our bosses. We have work to
Of
do.
course. Of
We've got to
course.
make a living, but it's just interesting. So, I mean, first and foremost, husband, father. My faith is a big, big part of my journey of who I am and what I'm about, even to this day. So that's very critical. And then my life purpose right now is I want to help leaders win at work and win at home. I believe it can be both. It's not one or the other. And so it's working with leaders to help them do that. I do it through executive coaching, through writing, speaking, and having the podcast. So that's who I am today. I'm a broken man trying to get better every day.
Yeah, and that's come up, Corey. You said you're a man of your faith, and I've had a couple conversations on here. The first book that I've had duplicate episodes for, talking to two different people, was the Bible. And what's interesting is, in one of those conversations, it was with a pastor, Jordan Aaron Brown. What's interesting is that I didn't expect to come up in the conversation is that the path of like not having it right. Maybe people have perception of religion that you read about it, and people that are pastors are very religious may claim to have it all together. But I learned, it opened my eyes even more to the fact that it's interesting that you mentioned broken. And Jordan laid out this path about, I may not get it perfect, but I'm working in the right direction. I'm working in the direction that I believe I should be working in. So it's just very interesting that you bring that up, within the first couple minutes of the podcast, that you are a broken man trying to do the best you can.
Yeah, I mean, that's a big part. I mean, that's a big part of my story of why I've written the books I've written, and why I kind of post what I do is I don't want people to screw up. I don't want them to screw up like I did. So I had a mentor tell me that wisdom is spelled WISDUMB. This idea that we get wisdom from dumb mistakes we've made, and so I have done that. And you reference the Bible, and there's scripture that basically our story, our testimony is much more powerful sometimes to somebody else than maybe just reading them scripture. And so that's, I go to my scripture, and quiet time is an important thing in my daily walk. But it is to really think through, hey, how can I share my story, share my testimony in a way to help others, so that they see it's more about a relationship with God than it is about a religion and you've got to do XYZ.
Yeah.
And I grew up seeing, well, for my faith being a Christian, I saw a lot of it. It just felt like veneer. Like they've got their
Yeah.
life great.
Yeah.
My job's amazing. My wife's amazing. It's all great. And that
Yeah.
was hard for me to relate to, whether I saw hypocrisy or I just saw unrelatability. It's just how it was. And then I started my career in Kansas City and eventually get to Denver. And now I live in Cincinnati.
Okay.
But in Denver, there was this time where I was just with great Christian men who were real. They were authentic. They may have talked about challenges they're having with their spouse. They may have talked about, porn addictions, and they're working through them. But I just started to hear that. And in that moment, that's when God really softened my heart to my own life, my own kind of skeletons in my closet.
Yeah.
And then that is when this started to be a big change for me.
I love that, because I think we need to have more visibility for vulnerability like that. people, you said veneer. When I had that conversation with the pastor, I had mentioned facade, that it's all about keeping up this appearance that I'm perfect in the eyes of God. Look, I have it all together. But I can appreciate more of those stories and backgrounds that have to do with trials, tribulations, challenges, obstacles, because more of us can relate to that. I think those kind of things, those kind of stories are the default without building up that facade, without building up that veneer. Like you said, it's just more real, and it's refreshing when you hear stories like that, because it does provide that authenticity. So thank you so much for sharing about that.
Yeah, you're welcome. And there's more in there to share.
Oh, I'm
So
gonna get to it. I'm
absolutely,
gonna get
yeah,
to it.
absolutely.
So to understand how you ended up here, you gave us some kind of a breakdown of your bio and how you or why, briefly, you shifted from executive work to the work you're doing now. But to understand how you got here, can you give us a breakdown of where you started? What did your path look like when you were younger? What put you not on the path to this necessarily, because I've spoken to a lot of guests that didn't find this calling, whatever they have as their calling, until later in their career. But what did your path look like? Just kind of an overview, whether it was as a child, whether it was having a mentor, whether it was a teacher, whether it was serendipity. What put you on your path, say in school? How did you choose kind of which directions to head in?
No, it's
And I
funny.
know that's a loaded question.
Well,
I
it's a loaded
apologize.
question, and it's funny you say is what's in school, what path did it put you on? I remember a counselor in high school told me that um well I was good at math, and so a lot of people, and I love development in cities and seeing growth, and so I was like, hey, I want to be a civil engineer. That good at math and like development, that seems to be a good win-win. I remember my high school counselor, and probably she didn't mean anything bad by this. I'm sure her heart was good, but what she said, or at least what I heard, was engineering. You're not smart enough to be an engineer. That's a bad choice. And I decided, I think a lot because of why she said it, or that I wanted to go do it, prove her wrong, which is not necessarily the best thing. I mean, yeah, there's times that maybe have a chip on your shoulder and get after something, but I think if that's your driver, that's just unhealthy.
It catches up with you.
It totally does. And we even saw a little bit of that in The Last Dance, that Michael Jordan show, where he talked about the chip on his shoulder, and then that's kind of in the scenes where he started crying and had a lot of sadness, because to your point, it catches up to you.
Yeah.
So it is funny you bring up the school. I had some reason thinking of the counselor. So maybe that was for some listener to remove the chip for yourself. Don't try to prove other people wrong. Just try to get better each and every day. And don't worry about the naysayers, because we're always going to have naysayers.
Yeah, and what's crazy about that lesson is, we hear it all the time, but it's like we're so stubborn that we don't it doesn't sink in until we experience it.
Yeah,
You
absolutely.
know? It's like we have to each, fall and falter through our trials, tribulations, pitfalls, but, we try to have that lesson sink in with people, but sometimes we just have to live it to really understand it.
Yep. Yep. So true. So I end up getting the civil engineering degree from the University of Missouri, and I start my career in Kansas City as a civil engineer. And why I'm in that job, I was taking my identity to work, and that's a big piece of what I continue to reinforce in my own life, as well as with my kids and my clients, is our identity can't be taken to something temporary,
Mhm.
because it goes away. Whether it's
Yeah.
your job, it's your it's your kids' grades. We can't even take our identity to our kids' success, because what happens when they're maybe not successful, or they make a poor choice? And so by taking our identity as something temporary, that is just a train wreck waiting to happen. But at the time, I did not know that. So I was taking my identity to work, and the work was doing the best they could to kind of help me. I was in my 20s, and they were putting me in these leadership programs, where I was the only one in my 20s in these programs. There's 30-year-olds and 40-year-olds in that group. So they were doing their thing, but yet it still wasn't fulfilling, and I wasn't getting. And so I then decided to take my identity to my wife, which is not a good thing either. You can't go take your value, your worth to somebody else. because
Corey,
they're also doing.
what does that mean? If you back up a little, what does that
Yeah,
mean what does that look like specifically, that you took your identity to work?
yeah, no,
What
it's
do you mean by that?
yeah. Glad you stopped me. um, Identity means, you take your value, you take your worth, you take, who you are to what you do. And that gets, very dangerous. I mean, so from a biblical standpoint, it's like my identity is being a beloved son of God, being a beloved son of God. And for other listeners, a beloved daughter of God. And that's my identity. And once I know that, then I can work from a place of approval as opposed to always looking for other people's approval.
Gotcha. Okay. Okay.
And it's interesting that, that's kind of a scriptural backing, but in Jeff Bezos' book, The Everything Store, he talks about even identity tied to your performance. There's this quote in there. It says, you can't feel 30% better about yourself when the stock price is up 30%, because you sure don't want to feel 30% less of yourself when the stock drops 30%. So
Point
whether it's a
taken.
kind of a biblical foundation or in something said in those more secular words or business related, it's the same. When we take our value, our worth, our identity to those temporary things that'll fluctuate, well, when they start to go south, that's when train wrecks happen. That's when people get,
Gotcha.
little
Okay.
red sports cars or,
Yeah, yeah.
whatever it could be. And so that's what I was doing. I was taking my identity to work. If I had a good day, I was like, yes, I'm the man. But if I had a bad day or I wasn't getting the job fulfillment, then it was just doom and gloom.
Understood. Okay.
So then when that was not working at work, I then say, hey, I'm going to take my value, my worth, my identity to my wife. That's a slippery slope as well, because our spouses have bad days. They're broken humans as well. Well, when that didn't work, John, I decided to take my identity to another woman, and I ended up having an affair. And it's obviously that's a bad idea. Don't do that, any listeners. But I ended up doing that. A few years later, I moved to Denver. I shared that story. I started to meet some real great, Christian men who were just being real. And at that time, God was soft in my heart. And that's when it was, hey, you need to come clean of your affair. I heard this in a quiet time one particular night. And I had an argument with God. Hey, I'm not coming clean of it. Why in the world would I do that? That's a dumb idea. I just got promoted to Denver. I'm making more money than I had. Why would I do that? But then I heard this phrase, just as audible. No one else obviously would have heard it in the room, but just in my head of, you need to hand over your story for a greater story. I had
Hmm.
no idea what that meant, but I did come home that night, and on my drive home, kind of negotiating with God. I was like, hey, if my wife's awake, I'm going to tell her. If she's not awake, I'm not telling her. Well, I walk in, she is not awake. She's asleep. So I was like, there you go, God, I win. I'm not saying anything.
Okay.
Next morning, I obviously start to feel the desire. I've got to tell her. I want to come clean of this. I want to figure out, hand over the story for a greater story. So I ended up telling my wife that I did, in fact, have an affair. And it was not cupcakes and balloons. I mean, it was awful. Slam doors and just not good. But we were able to work through it together. We were able to work through it, and individually both grew closer to God in the process, thanks to, seeing some help, seeing some, great community, but we also grew closer to each other. Well, then fast forward, I then moved to Cincinnati. When I get to Cincinnati, John, I'm VP of $120 million division, and all of a sudden I find myself taking my identity to work again. Like, I'm presenting the executive team, like, great job, Cory, you did awesome. I thought I was the man. And then when the pressures came, or they were disappointed in my presentation, or disappointed in the results, I literally thought, hey, I'm going to get canned. I was skipping gym workouts. I was laptop on my lap at night and not hanging out with the family. And it just kind of came to me. I'm like, whoa, whoa, whoa. I'm going down a bad path again. I've done this before, and I made a super poor choice. I'm getting help this time. And so I called my boss, and not obviously going into all my backstory to my boss. I just said, hey, I need some help. He's like, get an executive coach. I've always had one. So I was like, cool. So I interviewed a bunch of different executive coaches. I found one I liked who happened to also be faith-based. And I hired an executive coach about 10 years ago, and it changed my life. I know that sounds extreme, but well, one, it changed my career to now what I do for a living, but also just changed my life where I just was a better leader, a better father, a better husband. I was more kind of about purpose instead of just profit and how much money I was making. And then I ended up taking one more corporate move where I was president of sales for a national contractor. I had 30 salespeople throughout the country who reported to me. And these were the tools and frameworks I was using. I was talking to them about, dating their spouse. I was talking to them about being intentional with their kids. I was talking about
Mhm.
blocking time in their calendar to, do their business development in the morning and, do these things in the afternoon. I was talking about quiet time and all that. And what's crazy, John, is I saw them get better as well as spouses, as parents. But what was crazy is the profitability of the company increased. So I was like, wait, if this worked for me individually, it's worked for these 30 individuals. I want to go do this for a living and impact 300 people, 30,000, 3 million, whatever it may be. And
Yeah.
so that began the journey. And that's why I wanted to get into it, because of my own brokenness. I saw people who were broken, not living the life to the full. But then as I saw it change, I was like, this is what I want to do.
So now being where you are, if you look back at your childhood or when you were younger, is there anything that stands out that kind of says, okay, yeah, it makes sense that I'm here doing this kind of work?
Yeah, it's funny you asked that question because I was kind of just talking to my kids about this the other day, because there was this time when I was probably, I was either 14 or 15. I'd love to actually figure out the exact date, but call it 15, where I went to my dad's office. Office in his basement. I mean, he was doing remote work before it was even a thing. And he had on his bookshelf Dale Carnegie, How to Win Friends and Influence People. And I read the whole thing. I think that may have been like the first book I ever read.
Yeah.
That wasn't a kid's book, but I read that book from cover to cover. And what's cool, John, is I actually have that book on my bookshelf. Like that original that
The original
hardcover
copy that you read back
that
then.
I read. Yep, I've got it. And it's pretty sweet.
Yeah, it's
And
amazing how like most dads have that on their bookshelf. I remember my dad had that too. I never lucky for you, you read it. I was just like, I don't even know what the hell this means, but I'm sure I'll need it at some point, but I never got around to reading it. But it's amazing how many dads, from talking to colleagues, how many households had that book in the house.
right. Right. So I read that book, and so that was significant. And I always kind of read like the inspirational books. I started liking to read those, and little inspirational quote books would always kind of like a stocking stuffer seem like my family gave me. And so I know I was reading things like that. And which is pretty cool in itself. And then I think, so that's a part of my story for sure, is, hey, there was something there, kind of, brewing. Then I think another big part of my story is why did the hustle for the work, and why I was taking my identity to work, and kind of all those ideas is, my mom died when I was in high school, and through a battle of cancer. And that was hard for sure, no doubt about it. But a piece of that story that I think matters to this is, my dad was a single parent raising 3 kids, and there was times where he was unemployed, and there was times where it just felt like money was super tight. And so there was a lie that I would hear in my head of, hey, it's all on you. Like, you know, God's not going to provide for you, even though I had everything I needed. But there was just this lie I started to hear. And so there became moments that in college, like I'd hear this like lie, the devil would just say, hey, it's all on you. Just like it was in high school, it's all on you now. And then I get in my 20s and it's all on you. And, fast forward to even now, I mean, that is still something I've gotten so much more progress on it, but to
It
think
still
it's all on me.
lingers. It
Yeah, it
still
still
lingers.
lingers.
Yeah.
And where I think I'm the provider, and if I do all this hard work, then it's all going to happen. And so I'd just say in the last couple years, I've had enormous breakthrough in that, John. And the second book I wrote, Rise and Go, I actually kind of write a few chapters on those ideas. One of the big ones for me is this idea that, hey, God's got the night shift to the business. Like, I don't have to be working 24 hours a day. I don't have to always be looking for new LinkedIn connections. I always
Mm,
got to write a new post. And as you know, as a coach, as a podcast host, like, there's always another connection to make. There's always another speaking engagement to try to get. There's always another client to pursue. And just on and on. And I came to this realization that, hey, I'm going to work my tail off from 8 to 5, or whatever the hours are that particular day. But I have to have faith that God's got the night shift on my business, that I can be present with my family when I'm at
yeah.
home. I can be sitting around the dinner table. We don't have to be looking at phones. I
Mm,
can go play catch with my son if he wants to go play catch. Like, I can do all those things because God's got the night shift. Meaning, hey, I'm going to send out all those emails. I'm going to send out all those LinkedIn requests. And God's going to do the work to make sure the right people say yes. And while I'm throwing the football at my son, someone's thinking, hey, I want to hire Cory.
yeah.
And that's true of all of our businesses. And so it's just this idea of, hey, it's not all on us, which I thought for a long, long time. That's a wound that I was carrying right from my high school experience.
That it's all on you. It's all on
That's
you.
all on me. And so I'm breaking through some of those chains to say, no, it's not all on me. You know, so it's been pretty powerful for me.
Yeah, it's funny. Just yesterday I posted something. It was an article, but I added something to it, just making a comment about, how speaking to my audience or whoever's watching my feed is like, how do you just be? What
Mm,
is it that you do to just be? Like, we're always reading articles about meditation and gratitude, and you read a lot about people that are like, okay, I wake up in the morning, I do this, I do this, I do this. It's very regimented. Everything serves a purpose to that next thing or to elevate our performance, which is great. I'm guilty of it as well, but at the same time, it's like, at what point do we stop working towards that next thing and just be where we are? And like you said, put away the phone. Don't even think about, connection requests you sent out. Don't even think, if you can, about what's going to happen the next day. Be in that moment, being present. What does it look like to just be without working towards that next thing? So it's interesting that you brought that up. And I mean, I just enjoyed some moments like that. Like you said, with your son, I just enjoyed some of those yesterday where I took him to the amusement park and we just hung out, and it's peaceful just to watch them enjoy what they're experiencing, whether it's for the first time or the second or third time, just the life that is in their eyes when they're experiencing and discovering new things. So I, like you, I'm working towards that, trying to get better about that. But I love that phrase that you said, that he has the night shift. That you do what you can, but don't do it all the time. You have to kind of live in the moment and have faith, whatever your faith may be, that if you have the best of intentions, something will work out, or whatever's meant for you will work out.
yep, absolutely.
Um, Corey, why don't we, before we jump into the book that we're going to cover for this particular episode, what can you just talk a little bit about your previous book and what drove you? I can imagine what it might be, but what drove you to actually pull the trigger and write the book, your first book?
Yeah, my first book, Win at Home First. And obviously, I've shared some of my story, but there was basically, I published a book in 2019, and a couple years prior to that, probably about 18 months prior, I just, in kind of in a quiet time, I kind of felt this pull to write a book, like, kind of hand over your story for a greater story. That phrase has come back up to take
Hmm.
my lessons that I've learned in my own life, my experiences, my testimony, like we talked about at the very beginning. Take that, but also put in some tools and concepts that help me, but are also helping my clients, helping others. So, hey, write a book. Well, I'm like, and like, I was like, I'm not writing a book. I'm a civil engineer by degree. I'm a sales guy by career. I was like, I'm not an author. So I just basically kind of ignored the few of those promptings. And then, John, within a couple weeks, almost every one of my clients says, you should write a book. And I was like, all right, well, so I started writing some blogs. I didn't know what I was doing. I was writing blogs, sharing some kind of stories with some content. Then I hired a writing coach. And then we basically took, all my blogs, all my mess, and we kind of put it together and structured it. And the way it's structured is it's in 4 parts. The first part's you. It's understanding your identity, a little bit of what we talked about already. It's also kind of this idea of it, prioritizing our life using a framework, the 5 capitals that I was taught. And it's, first one, spiritual, whether you believe in God or not, but there's something greater than ourselves, and that's spiritual. The second's relational. So it's, love God, then love others. And what does that look like? Are you being intentional with those around you, going on dates with your spouse, hanging out with your kids? Do you have any friends that you spend time with? Then the third capital would be physical. It's about time and energy. Then intellectual is about insight and ideas. And then the last one's financial, which is about stewardship and generosity. So
Mhm.
those 5 capitals are in there. So that's all in part 1.
Yeah.
And then part 2 is about marriage, about pursuing our spouses, forgiving our spouses, communicating with our spouses. Part 3 is about parenting. And hey, how do we have fun with our kids, but yet also be truth tellers? And then the fourth part is about work, equipping, empowering our team. And so those are the 4 different parts that, because I believe that's the flow it needs to go. In order for us to lead well, we got to understand ourselves. Then the most important relationship in our life, it is our marriage, and then it's our kids, and then goes to work. So that's why I organized the book that way. And then the reason for really the desire to write the book, the reason for the title is it was a phrase I kept using. And an example is I was hired by a president of a company. They had about 200 employees. They were things were going great. And when I went interviewed for getting the coaching role, it was all about, hey, how can you help us with culture? How can
Mhm.
you help us kind of retain some culture as we're growing? We're pushing that 200 employee mark. That's a big mark. We don't want to lose any of the things we've got. Can you help us with vision and values of the organization? I was like, absolutely. And so on our very first call, we're talking, and he's talking about all the amazing things that have happened and how they've grown. And I was like, well, I've got to ask some personal questions. I got to get to know him and see what's going on. So I asked about the weekend. And in the weekend, he talked about how him and his kids went and did these things, and asked a couple other questions. And there's really no mention of his wife. And I remember when I interviewed to get the job, to get the coaching gig, he kind of said they'd been married 25 years. I was like, oh man, I just kind of got this, kind of prompting. I was like, oh, 25 years, he didn't mention much. And so I was a little bit nervous, but I felt, hey, I got to be obedient to bring this up. And so I said, hey, we talked a lot about work, and which is all good, but it sounds like, home is not going, maybe going great. I said, you hired me to help with the company, the vision, values, but we're going to be talking about the personal side a little bit here and there.
Mhm.
And because in order for work to be sustainable, for that success, we have got to be winning at home first. Is that okay with you to talk about? And I got nervous because it was my largest contract to date. I was like, man, I'm gonna get fired. And
Yeah,
the
yeah.
silence was deadly because I just was like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna get fired. He's gonna get mad. Maybe he'll, snap at me. I don't know. And so
Yeah,
he's
like you're
silent for
intruding or something.
totally. So
Yeah.
he's silent for a little bit, and he goes, yeah, it's okay. Every day I drive home, I get a pit in my stomach for the reentry back into the house. Yeah, it's okay. We can talk about it. So we did. So we, over the course of, I can't remember exactly how long that engagement was with him individually, was it 9 months or so? But man, we talked, we didn't spend the whole time talking about home. But
Mm.
once you just put some intentionality to it and it gets momentum, and then
Yeah.
so we worked on the company vision values as we're going to do. Him and his wife started dating again. So it worked out well. But the reason for the title and the reason really say, hey, I got to put this in a book is because if we want sustainable success in the workplace, we have got to be winning at home first. because in today's day, I don't know if you could ever compartmentalize home and work, but you can't today. If you get in a fight with your spouse at 7 a.m.,
Yes.
it's affecting your 9 a.m. meeting because you're not only thinking about, but maybe you get a nasty text sent from your spouse of, she's got one more last dig, or then you send something back. So you're not bringing your A game in the meeting. And then come the end of the
Yeah.
day, you're thinking about going back home. Your reentry. So you're like, oh, I'm going to say this. And if she says that, then I'm saying this.
Yeah.
And so it's just hard. So I think we just got to win home first.
Yeah, and I think the pandemic has opened people's eyes up to that there isn't that much of a threshold between who you are at home and who you are at work. That it's not as clean, it's not as bifurcated. Like it's not like you leave all that stuff at the door when you enter work and back and forth. I think it's really opened people's eyes up. Obviously, with the Great Resignation, they realized that they weren't getting what they needed from work. So it's opened up people's eyes to what they really want, and that you're not going to leave everything at home at home. I mean, it's gonna cross that threshold. So just as you speak about this particular leader, I think people have realized that it's not as cleanly divided as they would have thought, or we would have forced ourselves to try to be, even a decade ago.
Yep, absolutely. I mean, I think COVID, any little crack that was in a relationship, whether it was a marriage or a parenting relationship or whatever that crack was, man, just got fully exposed into a big old Grand Canyon.
Yeah, yeah, exacerbated. So then lead us into the new book, if you can give us the full title and just what brought you to writing this particular book.
Yeah, so the title is Rise and Go, and it's how to get back up with courage and move forward with confidence. And really, the reason I wrote the book is I firmly believe that we have all been knocked down, and we will get knocked down again for sure. Whether it's something done to us, we get fired, we get in a car wreck, we hurt our knee running, we just get knocked down and we're just in a funk. Or maybe it's something we've done to ourselves. We stayed up too late watching, Netflix,
Mhm.
or we just made some poor choices. But the reality is we all get knocked down. It's just the great leaders get back up quicker. And so what happened with me is I kind of shared the story how I wanted to get into coaching. And I left corporate America. And when I left corporate America, I actually was in fact terminated. So but I had a peace about it. Had it been terminated years ago and we were still talking about that identity piece, I would have been a wreck.
Yeah, yeah.
I would have been a total mess. But when I got terminated, this was about 6 years ago, it was one of those deals. Well, it was the private equity group. We were making some shifts, and you get rid of enough non-performing territories, then you don't need a president of sales anymore.
Yeah.
So I got terminated. But in that, when I was talking to the CEO and the CFO as they were terminating me, they just said, "Hey, Cory, you sound like you're doing all right. You good?" And I said, "Actually, I'm doing great. I've been praying for clarity because I wanted to get in this coaching full time, but I didn't want to leave my fancy title. I didn't want to leave I was making the most money I'd ever made. I don't want to leave all that and then start at the bottom to be a coach.
Yeah.
What if it didn't work out? I got kids' college to pay for. I've got all this to take place. What if it didn't work out? So you fired me, which gave me the clarity. It's time to move. And then you gave me a 4-month severance package. And I'm going to go hustle and try to, build something." So I went and did that. In the 4 months, I had enough clients to basically pay 50% of my income. And then I was introduced to a guy who ran a manufacturing company, and I did sales and business development for him for the other 50%. So I got this 50-50. And then over the course of those years,
Mhm.
I got more clients, got more speaking engagements. I published Win at Home First, and I went from 50-50 to 75-25 to 90-10. So it gets us to March 1st, 2020, and which is a great time to ever launch a business. But at that time, we obviously didn't know everything about coronavirus on March 1st. So we decided we're going all into coaching. It's all we've seen all the green lights. It's working. It was a nice stair step approach. Everything was cool. We got our own insurance. And
Mhm.
so my wife and I, we said, we're going all in. So we did. March 13th, which happens to be a Friday. I'm not a big superstition guy, but Friday the 13th, I think is so odd that that's the date. But that's when all the travel restrictions in the United States took place, was on that Friday. And for me, all travel being stopped, that killed all my speaking engagements. And for me at the time, that was 35% of my revenue. And I had a few big business development things that were canceled. And I was frustrated. I was scared. I was angry. I was in a valley. And so here I am in March and April, just basically knocked down, kind of down and out, frustrated. Even God, I mean, my quiet times weren't necessarily that quiet. It just was like, what the heck happened? I mean, did I miss something? Was I impatient? You know,
Hmm.
and kind of like I thought this was a plan. I thought you said go all into coaching. I did, and then this happens. So completely frustrated and scared. And so over the coming months, I started just getting pointed to different, whether it's scripture, whether it's inspirational quotes, whether it's guests on my podcast that had killer stories of resilience, whatever it was. I just started kind of accumulating some of this content that helped me get out of this valley. And, a lot of times when we think of up and to the right, it's a nice straight line. Well, it never is. It's
Hmm.
peaks and valleys as it goes up and to the right. And there's this graph that I actually put in my first book, Went Home First, where I drew this graph and I circle one of those low spots that are up on that graph. And because I'll have clients that are discouraged, we're not having that great of a quarter. And you have to do the same thing in your business where you've got to kind of pick people up where they're discouraged. Maybe it's a relationship not going well, or their business performance isn't doing very good. And I'll circle this low point on the graph and say, hey, look, this is where you're at just at this moment. Yeah, the devil is trying to tell you you're going to be there forever. Your head trash is telling you you're going to be there forever. But look how far you've come to
Yeah.
where this graph started to where you're at now. And then look how far we've got to go.
Yeah.
So I was reminded of a graph that I drew, but I just kind of forgot about it because when you're in the valley, it's kind of foggy and you can't see anything. So I then kind of had this visual of thinking of that same graph, that same valley, but a ladder kind of coming out of it, like with ladder rungs. And I was like, this content I'm kind of putting together, these turning out to be kind of my ladder rungs to get me out of this valley. So in 2020, as I'm putting together this content, I start sharing it with my clients and it gets battle tested. And I share it in 2021 with my clients and it's helpful. So I was like, John, I got a book here. So I put it into a book called Rise and Go. And there's 20 chapters, 10 around this idea of building up courage and the other 10 about going forward with confidence. Each of the 20 chapters are tied to a leadership trait such as faith or hope or perseverance, or even time management, and there's a variety of different ones in there. And in that, I just have been getting the book out as much as possible, doing keynotes, and just seeing the fact that I want this book to be a resource for people because we all will get knocked down again. Whether it's, hey, here comes this recession, or, oh man, here comes another presidential election, or there's an illness in the family. And so with all that, it's like, hey, I want this to be a resource for people that they can go to. And so that's the reason behind Rise and Go.
Yeah. It's amazing how we can lack resilience, Corey. Um, and then here comes that word again, facade or veneer. We feel that pressure to keep appearances, that we got full control of what's going on. And meanwhile, that does us in because that also takes energy away from you. You have to keep up appearances and whatnot. So, I mean, hopefully with the pandemic, it's kind of forced people out of that. I found, I mean, that's what led to this podcast was just the podcast began. I started attending online forums, online speakers, online networking events, and there are information sessions and your breakout rooms, and people are sharing more of themselves because they're in their environment. They feel more comfortable. They feel maybe they feel their back is against the wall, so they're sharing more of who they are. Um, So I love the fact, it's a silver lining of the pandemic that people are coming forward. They're being more honest with their trials, their tribulations, that it's hard to be resilient sometimes. Even with you, what you shared about in March, how you felt when everything was canceled and you were talking to God and you said, listen, I thought this was the plan. What's going on?
All right.
Um, and especially that it happens to a coach. You know what I mean? Because there's sometimes where I may explain or share that something's going off in my life or I'm not feeling quite right. And people are like, well, you're a coach, fix it. But even coaches need coaches. Yeah, being a coach doesn't mean you have all the answers. For me, I think for our profession, it means that you're really curious and you're really driven to help people search for those. I don't think it ever means you have the answers. You're just very curious and you want the best for obviously yourself, your family, and your clients. But I love that we're seeing more vulnerability and understanding that we all go through our shit. We all go through that. You know what I mean? Because I think that's what does us
Absolutely.
in. I think that's what burns us out. I think that's part of what may lead to anxiety, depression, mental health issues is just this energy that it takes to keep up appearances that, I'm not cracking. I have everything under control. Even if it breaks down, I'm completely fine. But so I completely appreciate the fact that you've shared so much about those moments that you've had where you've questioned what is going on here.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, I think for that listener who's just listening, I mean, one thing I would say, of anything, of just, and you're not alone. I mean, if you feel like your marriage isn't that great, or you're just not connecting with your teenager, or you don't even know if you're really living out your purpose very well, or if you're at the right job, then you are not alone. I think one thing that opened my eyes, I'm super grateful for, is my job itself, getting to be a coach, and a lot of it is I do a ton of Zoom. I did Zoom even before 2020, but whether I'm in Zoom or across the table with the client in person, man, every single person is broken. Every single person is just, they don't know if they're doing enough. They don't know if they're the right leader to get the company all the way, through Q4. Or are they doing the right thing to develop their leaders? And so now when I get a new client, I'm in my caliber of clients is going up. Man, I used to be so intimidated by getting a new client and like, oh no, man. Once you get going on a coaching call or a Zoom call, or having across the coffee table, they're just the same as everybody else.
Yeah.
And so I
Yeah.
think if you're a listener, you don't have that privilege or to talk to a lot of different leaders like I have from in that coaching relationship, man, we're all battling with it. Even myself, like you said, coaches have coaches. I have a coach. I've had multiple coaches in the last decade. I wish I would have got them sooner in my career, to be honest.
Yeah.
But anyways, I have a coach now, and I talk to him once a week, organized, and then occasionally, kind of organically, through a random phone call or a text here and there.
So Corey, what is the breakout of this book? What does that path look like that you take the reader through to understand what that means to rise and go? How is it you set it up for 'em?
Yeah, for sure. I there's actually, I'll call it, there's three parts. The first part is part one, where it's the 10 chapters that are all about courage and helping us get back up. Because sometimes when you're in that valley, you can't even get up. It's like, I don't know. And so one of the chapters is, hey, what do you want?
Yeah.
And so inside each of the chapters is, I open up with a scripture, and then I, have basically some stories, or, inspirational quotes, or just ideas, or some pieces of content. Then I end with reflective questions, followed up by a written prayer. So in all those, the chapters they're about 2,000 words in each of the chapters, so they're very doable to read in a day,
Mhm.
and to think and kind of ponder on that idea if you want. And each of them are tied to a leadership trait. So on that example, is like, what do you want? Is like, when we're in that kind of in that low spot, it's like, hey, redefine what you want. Like, what are you going after? Because
Yeah, it's
you
amazing
got to
how many
forget that.
people push forward. They put all their energy into something, but they never really sat back and gave themselves a clarity by kind of even writing down what it is they want. They have like a vague idea of what their success looks like or what other people anticipate they should be doing, but they rarely really sit down by themselves to think about what it is they want. Again, because if you're doing it based on somebody else's definition of what success for you looks like. You're going to burn out trying to keep up because you have this idea of what it looks like, but you're meant for something else. The energy you have to burn is meant for something else. So the clarity, just that aha moment when they realize that they can give themselves permission to really think about what they want is intriguing. It's amazing when they find that permission almost to
Yep.
really give themselves that clarity.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly it. It's permission. I mean, not to go all Bible on this, but a the very first words that are captured by Jesus in the book of John is when he talks to two disciples and he says, "What are you seeking?" Those are the very first word captured. Then in Matthew, two blind men show up to Jesus and he basically asks them a question like, what do you want? Like, what do you want to have healed? Maybe they
Yeah.
didn't want their sight healed. Maybe they wanted their sins forgiven, or maybe they had a relationship that was broken and they wanted that healed.
That's a great example where it's blind men and you're just assuming that this is what they want fixed,
Yeah.
but
And
yeah.
so in both those examples, it's there's power in articulating what we want. There's power in word. There's power in speaking it. You probably do this
Yes.
with your
Absolutely.
clients. When
Absolutely.
I get a new client, I basically say, "What do you want?" And ask it a bunch of different ways, such as, "Hey, what could we be celebrating in a year?" Or "What would success look like after this engagement?" Like I just different ways to kind of to get it. But in that, I'll get answers of what they want. What are they going after in this season? What are they going after in this, maybe even decade
Yeah.
that they start to think about? Or, what are those desires that God's put in that they want to pursue? Once they start to articulate it, then I, as a coach, can help guide them there. I can hold them accountable. I
Mhm.
can give them that nudge. I can give that encouragement when they want. And the same is true even in with Jesus when he's asking. It's just like, hey, what do we want? So we can go that direction. Maybe we don't want our sight healed.
Yeah.
And so there's so much power in what you want. So when you're in the valley, you don't even know what you want sometimes. And so it's like, hey, think through what is that. So that's one of the chapters. We got
Yeah.
19 more to go, John, if we're gonna do this. But
No, but I appreciate those examples because it gives people an idea. And I obviously I'm a sucker for quotes. I post them all the time. I ask people what they take away from them. There are great lessons there, and I appreciate those examples, even from the Bible. I'm not overly religious, um, but those are just great stories, great examples, especially that one, the two blind men, and just assuming what it is that they want.
mhm,
Because I think too many people come into their work. You may meet with an executive or coaching client, and obviously for the most part, they're thinking work. Okay, what do I need to achieve at work? And as you said, you kind of keep chipping away with questions to kind of get to what it is they need, which then allows them to carry out that work.
yep, yep, absolutely. So that's part one is all about the kind of get back up with courage, and then the part two is another set of 10 chapters about going forward with confidence. And so, in that, there's some of the leadership traits we talk about is a commitment, being committed to what you're going after. It's, and for me, just a story in that I even share in the book is I realized that I was reading this book called The Last Arrow by Erwin McManus, which is, he's a pastor in California. It's a fantastic book. And he shares this story, and basically it has to do with a story in the Old Testament, but King Joash is his name, and he is in a battle and he needs some help. So he asks Elijah, who was a prophet, hey, I kind of need some help, tell me what to do. And he goes, hey, and take out the arrows in your quiver, shoot one out the window, and then shoot the rest into the ground. King Joash takes out one arrow, shoots it out the window as he was commanded, but then he only shoots out 3 into the ground. And Elijah gets frustrated, basically, hey, why didn't you shoot all your arrows? Are you keeping one in the quiver to just in case God doesn't show up and help you in this victory? So as I'm reading this, John, I'm just convicted that, you know what? I'm holding on to something. I got an
Mm,
arrow in my quiver just in case coaching doesn't work out for me. Then I was renewing my professional engineering license every year just in case coaching didn't work out. Like my arrow in the quiver was to spend money, to spend time getting renewed for engineering, just in case coaching didn't work out. Then I could go back into corporate America and use my civil engineering credentials. And I was like, no, no more. Like I'm shooting that final arrow in the ground. I'm going all into what I believe God's calling me into. And so I did. I let my engineering license expire right then. I didn't renew it. I have the engineering stamp on my bookshelf as a reminder of that kind of monumental moment in my life where I kind of went all in. I handed it all over. And so like that's a chapter in that second part of, hey, whatever you're going after, are you all in? Or are you kind of keeping some stuff in the tank? And there's
Cory,
a time in our life we got to make sure it's the right move.
what does confidence mean to you? I mean, not mean to you. How do you define it?
Yeah, confidence is just that believing more in yourself and in what you're doing by just getting more and more reps.
Hmm.
Like I don't have confidence. I may have confidence for like one thing, like one time, but man, if I start doing a lot more, like speaking more in front of people, I'm just more reps I get, the more belief I have in myself, in the message, and in the delivery, then I can do it. So it takes reps for sure.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so in that confidence is just like one was just perseverance. I mean, there was a big thing in sales where when I would get no's, I would get defeated. Like literally, like you just defeated, like, oh, this isn't gonna work out. This is gonna be a bad month. Ugh. And I
Yeah.
remember I followed Jeffrey Gitomer, and he's a big sales guru. And I remember one time I saw him speak like 20 years ago, but I've been following him since. But he determined how many no's it would take to get a yes. And if he got a no, he would be like, oh, great, great. I just, I need 7 no's and I'll get a yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so he saw the no's
Yeah.
as just a step towards the yes, where I would find the no's just to be,
Closed
defeating
doors
and
in
just
your
close
face.
over. Yeah. So there's a chapter on that is how do you handle your no's?
Cory, was in engineering, was all the executive experience that you had all those years, was that still in the engineering field or was that outside of the engineering field?
All engineering field, but just a
Okay.
different part of it. So I
Okay.
was a civil engineer by degree coming out of school where I designed um, airports. We work on runways, taxiways, and the gates layouts.
Okay.
Civil engineer doing that design. I then got out of that because I didn't like the design. I didn't like sitting in a cubicle and doing a bunch of design. So I then got involved in civil engineering sales, where I sold storm sewer,
Okay.
bridges, erosion control. And so that's what I then did for the next, call it 10 years of my career selling civil engineering products. And then for the last few years, I was the president of sales for basically a specialty contractor in the civil engineering space.
Okay.
So
Yeah, I just wanted that
yep.
clarification. I didn't know if you had left the engineering field completely and just done sales in different fields, different industries, but okay, that helps. How and just a tangent that I always go on is how do you feel that engineering degree, that engineering experience, um, how does that meet where you are now? Because engineering is so I'm not an engineer, but it's very black and white. It's very numbers driven versus the work that you do is kind of the opposite side and on the soft skill side. How does that engineering experience, the work that you did, the years that you spent in that field, how does that help you do what you do now? Aside from working with leaders in engineering, the actual engineering work, what of that is applicable, do you think, to the coaching that you do? What kind of mindset kind of transfers over?
I think two things that are coming to mind. One is the analytical side is just looking how do we solve problems? And so if I've got a problem with someone or I'm talking to someone who has a problem, I want to figure out how to solve it.
Yeah.
And so I'm really kind of thinking through, giving a bunch of different examples and
Scenarios,
scenarios and
pathways,
thinking through, hey,
options.
how do we solve it? And then the other one is helps with my business side itself is just the KPIs and the number side of business of, am I doing all the right things to help grow my business from KPI standpoint? And then I'm quickly taking that right into the clients of like, hey, are you doing the right things to grow your business? Even little things like time management. I coach a lot of executives, and they get in the business. They want to be more working kind of on the business, right? We've all heard that. It's like, well, stop thinking about it. Let's do something about it. How many hours do you think you need to work on the business in a week? Maybe 2 hours.
Gotcha.
Great. Block it out in your calendar right now. While we're talking, figure out the time to do it. When's the best time? Probably Thursday morning. Okay, great.
Do it.
8 to 10 or 9 to 11? 9 to 11. Great. Put in the calendar. But it's
Yeah.
one of those deals where I think that the curiosity, wanting to solve the problem, as well as just, kind of getting practical, getting the numbers and rolling up the sleeves. And I think that's what's been helpful.
So what's the next section in your book?
Yeah. So part 3 is a part that I'm not going to say my favorite part, because I think all pieces are added, is the Rise and Go manifesto. I'm
Okay.
not the first guy to come up with the idea of a manifesto. People have been doing manifestos for decades and, having something to read. But what I did, John, is I took different parts from the book and said, hey, I'm going to put together this Rise and Go manifesto. It's 8 different parts. And it's a document that I have. It's a Google Doc that I use, but I put the framework in the back of the book, and I'll look through this manifesto a couple times a week. And it basically is kind of like putting on my armor. It's getting ready for the day. And so the different sections are like, the first part's an identity prayer. Like it's a prayer that I will read of things that I believe that, God is telling me or has told me, and just a reminder. And some of it is super important. Well, it's all important to me, but some of it you may look at and be like, that doesn't mean much to me. But you may see something like, yeah, that's pretty cool. I like that one, because it's all customized to me. It's what I wrote.
Yes.
Like,
Yes.
God is my provider is part of that prayer. Well, that's
Yeah.
big to me, because what I said earlier about my high school, that experience. God is a, forgiver. That's huge to me because of the stupid mistakes I've made. So that's the first part. Then the second part's like kind of an identity bio. I mean, it may come across as a kind of a braggadocious section, but it's true.
Yeah.
It's like in there. It's just like, I've written 2 books.
Mhm.
I've, you know, um, I run, couple, different masterminds. I have, done this. I have 100 episodes of my podcast. Like all these like true statements. So there's no lying. But
Yeah.
what happens is
Yeah.
when we're in the rut,
Yeah.
John, we think we suck.
Well, I mean, exactly. It goes back to the graph that you were talking about.
Yeah.
When you think you're in the valley, you don't look back and see that the valley is actually the peak of your journey, that you've been working up to that, and now you're lower, so you feel you're at your worst. That's the way we are. We always think that whatever we're feeling today is what we're going to feel for the rest of. That's our permanent state of feeling, of being, of accomplishment, of success. We always need that reminder. I mean, I don't know how people do their gratitude thing, whether it's a journal, a list. Mine isn't just a list, like what I've worked on, what I felt proud of, who I have as potential clients, projects that I have coming up. Similar to that, just because we always feel static, like right now it defines who we are without really giving ourselves credit.
Yep. Absolutely. And so I'll read that to be reminded of it, because there's some days it's like, I'm not doing anything good in business, or I'm awful. The coaching degree, the coaching's over.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
I'll
yeah.
kind of
Yeah.
reread that in the morning. I'm like, oh yeah, no,
Yeah.
I got
Yeah.
stuff going on. I mean, because momentum's a mindset. And
Yes.
so as I see that, I start to be like, okay, yeah. And then there's another section. I got a section there like God has a night shift. Like I have things that are written in there to remind me of crazy things that happened that only God could orchestrate. I met a guy at a conference in California who happened to be from Germany. We met at the booth. I gave him a copy of my book. He then, took the book, went to Germany where he lived, ended up meeting a publisher who says, I want to bring an American Christian book over here. He said, oh, I got a book in my hand. And it
Yeah.
got published in Germany.
Yeah.
And so Went Home First is published in German language. That never could have happened on my own.
Hmm.
Oh, unless I sent out like 2,000 email requests to publishers in Germany and trying to make things happen. I got no connections in Germany.
Yeah.
But that's a story. And there's just like, and we all have them. So I'll work with clients and I'll tell them, hey, document those crazy cool things.
Yeah.
Oh, you got that
Yeah.
you just got a huge project you never thought you would. Write it down.
Yeah.
You just got an amazing employee that you never thought would say yes to your company because you're a small company. They were a big company and you just got them. Write it down.
It's amazing how how clients that I've worked with don't even take into account compliments that they get from people.
Yes.
You know,
One. Yes.
just at the most simple example is when they're like, "Oh, you know, I got a thank you from this person about the impact that I've had on the team, and that they look to me for this and then they move on." I'm like, "All right, well, we'll back up. Like, what do you think of that? Like, how does that make you feel? Like, you know, because if they have a rut down the road, again, they're stuck in that moment and they don't think about those impacts that they've made, that ripple effect that they've laid out for other people. So it's amazing just to remind people to give themselves permission to look at what they've accomplished because we're always in reactive mode. We're always, you know, head down, nose to the grindstone, trying to move forward without really looking up and back to see what we've accomplished to date. So that's a great reminder.
Yeah. So that's the Rise and Go Manifesto. There's 8 parts in it. And for me, it's a big Google Doc. And I don't read it every day, nor do I read every part every day. I just kind of scroll through it and see what's jumping out and what do I need to hear today.
Yeah. So, Corey, I'm always curious about what we do as adults, as professionals, and then what the lesson may be, how it may be shared with younger generations. We talk about resilience, we talk about grit, and we need to talk of that because there's always the fear of failure. So I'm curious because we've talked about resilience, moving forward, confidence, um, and then we've also talked about our own children. How do you pass these lessons on, or how do you plant the seeds for your children? You know, we've talked about the fact that we all have to go through our experiences. So we're not going to solve all our kids' future experiences with one dose of advice or whatever it may be. But how do you go about instilling that and planting certain seeds to get them into certain mindsets or ways of thinking that can prepare them for a life of meeting these obstacles and challenges?
Yeah, I'm sure it's annoying to be a son or a daughter of a coach. And your kids probably, if they haven't expressed it yet, they may at times. And I have definitely heard a few things here and there along the way of, hey, chill out, dad. We don't need to know that or whatever. But no, in all seriousness, everything that I'm learning, I'm doing, I am trying to figure out how to share with them because it does have value and it will make them better. Perfect example. We've been talking about identity quite a bit on this. I have been talking to my kids about identity. Well, I'd say probably for the last probably 6, 7 years when I really started to learn more about it myself and the power of it. Maybe it's been 10 years, but anyways, that they are beloved sons and daughters of God, and what they do is not as important as who they are. And I've seen the fruit of that already, John, because all my kids have had various setbacks. But the one like we're currently dealing with in our house is my 14-year-old is a competitive gymnast. Just for context, it was teeter-totted between level 8 and level 9. This is going to be the transition year. She's probably going in level 9. Level 10 is the highest. Then it's college. So like we talk about what do you want? Like what she wants is she wants to be a college gymnast.
Yeah.
Well, she took a nasty fall off the high bar the other day at practice and fell down. It is a foam pit, but it's surrounded by concrete. Now the concrete's got a pad on it, but she hit her leg on it super duper hard. Luckily nothing's broke. However, some damage has been done to the ankle and it will require surgery. So she's going to
Mhm.
be out for months
Yeah.
on this. But because we've talked identity, she's mentally stable and strong. Matter of fact, she's been pretty much bedridden for 10 days since this happened. Where she's either laying on the couch with her leg propped or she's laying in her bed with her leg propped. But she's like texting her friends and she's encouraging them on different things. Like she's in a good spot because she knows her identity is a beloved daughter of God and is not in being a gymnast. It is
Mhm.
not being an straight A student. It is not how many likes she gets on Instagram or friends she has on Snapchat or whatever it is. She understands what her identity is. And then from that, she then can go be a gymnast. She then can go do amazing things at school. And so that is an example of how it has been so fruitful in our life to talk about it. Another one is failures. You talk
Yeah.
about resilience. I remember reading about a study that was done that they did all these different kids, and the kids that were more resilient in their life, where they were able to get back up after a bad score on a test, or they were able to get back up and maybe being cut from a team. The kids that were more resilient, and they kind of pressed in, hey, why did this group do so much better than the other kids? It's because they have heard of stories of their own parents failing and getting back up.
Yeah.
So many people out there, when they sit around the kitchen table, they don't talk about the failures. They don't talk about the losses.
Mm.
Dad wants to look super duper strong, and dad's got his crap
Yeah.
figured out,
Yeah.
and all this, or maybe the mom's the same way as, I can do all these things and
It's
I'm
like the
fine
highlight reel.
all the time, and no one wants to talk about failures. But for us in our house, we talk about the successes of the cool
Of
things. Hey,
course.
we got another book coming out, or we kids got a great grade on a test, or whatever it is. But man, we also talk about the failures.
Yeah.
All three of my kids know that I had an affair. I've
Yeah.
obviously told them age appropriate stuff, but the reason
Mhm.
I've told them that, well, two reasons. One, I don't want them going down that path from the standpoint, if they're anything like me, I don't want some generational sin of, hey, if they aren't satisfied in their home, they're going to go look elsewhere. So one, I want them to know, hey,
Yeah.
this is in my blood or in my whatever, and I don't want it going down to you. So that's one reason. But the other reason is I want them to know I screwed up, I made a mistake, but God's not done with me.
Mhm.
He's actually going to use me, use my mess, and turn it into something that I can share with others. Same thing for you kids. There's nothing you're going to do that's going to jack things up so bad that God's done with you and your life's over. So let's, whatever happens, let's pick it back up and let's get moving. So
I love
that's an
that.
example of resilience. And if I'm in a bad mood because I lost a client, I'm not going to say, don't worry about kids. It's nothing. Hey, Dad, you seem like you're in a bad mood. Don't worry about it. No,
Yeah.
I'll
Yeah.
say, hey,
Yeah.
I lost a big client today. It sucks.
Mhm.
So I'm a little frustrated. I'll get through it, but thanks for asking. So it's
Yeah.
like that, man. It's be vulnerable at home. Share the wins, share the losses, share what you're learning.
I love that. Thank you for that lesson. Uh, and Corey, I'm curious, in writing this, what lessons have you taken away from the book? Like, how have you seen yourself evolve? Maybe how did your thinking change? How did you grow? How did you learn? How did you evolve just based on writing this book? What came out of it?
I think even to myself, it's a reminder to get back up, because there's been some low points. I mean, I've said this. I just said that I did a keynote yesterday on this talk, and I actually have still go back to this book because it's helping me get back up quicker each time I've been knocked down. So I'm still getting knocked down. There's still things that aren't
Hmm.
happening. I was super excited about the speaking engagement I was supposed to have in September, and they just came back and just said it's a no-go. It's like, what? Like, it
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
looking so good. I thought the stars were aligning.
Yeah.
So it's like I got to get myself back up. And so it's one of those deals where I have just been learning and being reminded, and I'm not all the way through it, but that idea that God's got the night shift. And another phrase I use a lot is, I control the input, but God controls the impact.
Ooh, I like that.
And so for me, I just got to keep reminding myself, hey, I got to do the work. I need to get on podcasts. I need to get LinkedIn posts. I need to, do this. And hey, if it's gonna if it's gonna go viral, then great. If it doesn't, it's not for me to get all frustrated and beat myself up.
Great points. Great points. What do you think? And I know you're still in the thick of doing publicity and interviewing and sharing ideas from this book. But what do you think? Do you have a general idea of where you might go with your writing in the future? What the next book may be on, even if it's just a direction or a topic, even if you haven't broken it down to what you want to include in it?
Well, it's funny you bring up another book, because just the other day my wife was asking, or was talking to someone who has read Rise and Go and was very complimentary of it, to her, is actually our dentist. And hey, is he going to write another book? And she kindly said, and she's told me this before, so it's okay. But she says, I don't know. She goes, usually by the time he's getting done writing the book, he's not winning a home first anymore.
Yeah.
Because it's stressful. It's just like any
Yeah.
work project. It's stressful. And so there are those things. So I don't know if my wife will let me write a third book. I'm just kidding. I don't know what it's going to be. I really don't. I don't know if it'll be more focused on kind of on the home front, because I'm super passionate about that, or it's about kind of the work side of things. I mean, I believe they're integrated for sure. I mean, both books weave in, hey, what are you doing about this at home? What are you doing about this at work, kind of thing.
Yeah.
But I don't know. It's something that I think there's more to be written for sure.
Yeah.
I'll be
And I
writing
mean,
more
just to
books.
reiterate, I appreciate the post that you shared of your families. Because again, it's not just a picture of the family and look, I'm a family man or anything like that. It is, here's a picture of my family dropping off my daughter, your other daughter's unfortunate accident in gymnastics. But there's always like a lesson, like a thorough, well thought out lesson, ideas that you share with that post. So I appreciate that you share so much. You're not just talking the talk, but you're walking it as well, sharing those lessons that you find in your everyday with your family. So I appreciate those. They're insightful and they're inspiring just because it helps me as a father realize that I know they're there, but it reminds me on an ongoing basis that those lessons are there for how to be a better father, a better husband, better citizen, whatever it may be. So I appreciate those a lot, Corey.
Oh man, thank you. Oh, thank you. I appreciate that, John. Because you put in that effort for some of those posts. You're like, is anyone reading this? Oh, great. 3 people
Yeah.
liked it. Sweet.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah, but I mean, for me, I find even if one person reaches out and says, "Hey, listen, that stood out to me," it's just amazing. I don't look to the reward of it anymore. I look to the value that I want to share. And I mean, it's within me. I have this value I want to put out there. I have a lesson maybe I want to share with others or start a conversation. So for me, it's just the ability to put it out. And like you said, I can't control the other side of it. Mine is to put in the work on my side and see what happens, what's in the cards for me. So it all ties back to that message that you shared about just God and the night shift. So that's an interesting way to look at it, and it's one that I'll keep in mind.
Yeah. Cool. I mean, it's simple but very profound in the standpoint of, man, if we just handed things over.
Yeah, yeah. So in wrapping up, Corey, is there anything else you want to share about what you're up to, or anything at all that you want to just share with this audience about what you're up to, what you have in the pipeline, anything at all?
I mean, thank you very much for having me on here. I
Absolutely.
appreciate your questions, and just enjoyed the chemistry of talking, for sure. I think for any listener, if there's anything you heard, just one thing, just take action. I remember there's a quote I put in the Win at Home First book that it's not mine, but a guy named Steve has the quote of, a inch of action is further than a mile of intention.
Mm,
And so if you heard this, it's this idea of information plus implementation leads to transformation. So we've had a great conversation, a lot of, back and forth, some, nuggets here and there that were shared. But if we don't do anything with it, it's a waste.
yeah,
Just like all the books on behind both our backs on our bookshelves.
yeah,
If we read the books, don't do anything different, then nothing's going to change. So if there's something I said that's like, oh, he said date my wife or date my husband. Well, I haven't
yeah,
been on a date with them in a long time. Great. Take one action. Go on a date. That's it. That's cool. Do that. Or maybe I should journal more or reflect more. Great. Take that one action, do it. But just do something from here to start making progress towards transformation and towards growth. So that'd be the one thing I'd say as far as what I'm up to, man. I'm excited about Rise and Go. I've got a workshop that's going to be out both in live in-person versions as well as online. I'm doing keynotes to companies of various sizes. Heck, I've even done some keynotes, just same talk, but just to a small, to small groups. So
Yeah.
I'm not. I want to get the word out. So if you're listening to this, you want to hear Rise and Go brought to your team, your company, your small group, reach out and we can talk, figure out a way to do it. And
Thank you so
so,
much,
yeah,
Corey.
thank you.
Thank you so much. Just because, yeah, just get started. And it doesn't have to be an overnight success. Sometimes it's a trickle, it's incremental steps, it's that 1% every day. But I mean, just getting started, you'd be surprised if you just sit there and it just percolates in your head, but you're not doing anything with it. You'd be surprised what just a couple steps of action can lead to. And I'm glad that you put that message out there, and it plays out in everything you've shared, just the stories you've shared, your experience, your coaching, all of that. That no matter what happens, just keep moving forward.
That's right. That's right.
Perfect.
We're not defined by the mistakes for sure.
Again, Corey's book is Rise and Go: How to Get Back Up with Courage and Move Forward with Confidence. Corey, again, thank you so much. I'm looking forward to having another conversation like this if you'd indulge me in the future. So I appreciate your time. If there's anything that I might have missed, just reach out to me on my social media, wherever you are looking at this, watching it, listening. If it's something that I didn't have time to ask Corey or I didn't think about, just let me know. I'll reach out to him. But in the meantime, thank you for watching and listening, and I'll talk to you soon. Take care. Bye.